Good afternoon. I know most of the talks this afternoon are about success and progress, but I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about failure. In many ways, failure is the F-bomb of our lives. We all spend a tremendous amount of time trying to avoid failure, but is that really possible? I want you to think back to when you were in school. You were handed a pop quiz. Raise your hand if you asked, "Does this count?" I'm sure many of you go through a yearly evaluation at work. How many of you have ever asked, will this assessment become part of my permanent record? And then we have family. How many of you have ever considered, what will my family think of me when I make this decision? We are all driven by numbers, data, reports, and reviews. In this college acceptance and corporate ladder world, we are driven by failing. Fear of failure causes students to stay up until 3 o'clock doing their homework, and in many cases causes executives to lie, cheat, and steal. So what does failure mean to you? Is it, I didn't get the grade I wanted? Is it, my boss criticized my work and she yelled at me? Is it, I got a 5% raise, but damn it, I deserve more? So I'd like to take a moment. Will you close your eyes, please? I'd like you to think about a failure in your own life, a big, epic failure. Think about what it felt like, what it looked like, how it affected you, how it affects you now. Hang on to that memory. Okay, open your eyes. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. Allowing failure to overrun your life can be completely debilitating. A failure at the top of the food chain can start a war. It can ruin a relationship. It can spur jealousy between friends. It can tear families apart. So let's deconstruct failure and look at its component parts and analyze and reframe it for our purposes. So first, is it really failure, or is it adversity that fuels our fears? Isn't it the pushback of unknown factors that churns our stomachs and causes our pulses to race? And anxiety, generated by the notion that other people succeed while we alone have a patent on failure. I love this book. Yes. It's big among the read me a bedtime story age bracket. But its message is pretty clear. Everyone poops, and therefore everyone fails. The key is to recognize the challenge, the reality, and the adversity of this within our lives. I love this iceberg. At the top, the 10% we see is labeled success, while the bottom says what really happens. And that includes struggles, failures, persistence, criticism, disappointments. Like the iceberg, we have been lured to think that success only happens on the surface. But the reality is that iceberg will not float without all of that submerged mass. We need failures in order to succeed. And the winner is La La Land. Oh, wait a minute, no, it's not. This monumental and epic failure could have really been a disaster. It was certainly controversial. But Jordan Horowitz, the producer, stepped forward and said, no, this is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. He took responsibility in the moment. How often do we step forward and take responsibility for our own failures? I was raised in the Lutheran Church in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I went to catechetical classes. I have forgotten most of what I learned. But the one thing that I do remember is that doubt strengthens faith. When I first heard my pastor say that, I thought, well, this doesn't make any sense. Those are two completely disjunct ideas. But as we discussed it, I learned that doubt provides questions. Questions lead to curiosity. Curiosity leads to answers. And then those answers either support your faith or breaks your faith, in which case you move on to an alternative. So adversity causes change. We learn from our mistakes, not from our successes. I think this is one of life's greatest truths. 65 years ago, UNIVAC was installed at the U.S. Department of at the Bureau of the Census. It was the first computer used at the Census Bureau. It required an entire room. It took up 382 square feet and needed 5,000 vacuum tubes. And yet it had less computing power than this iPhone. If it wasn't for the struggles of NASA, as they tried and worked to miniaturize transistors and just about everything else as part of the space race, that would have never happened. It was their research leading to failures and answers, and more research and more failures and more answers that finally gave us this technology. And now we are the beneficiaries of that. And too often, I think we lose track of this. So that's NASA's story. I have two very personal stories I'd like to share about adversity and failure in my own life. In the 1970s, when I was a freshman at Northwestern University, I arrived on campus convinced that I was going to hide the fact from everyone that I knew that I was gay. I really struggled with that. But I made friends. I learned to sort of accept myself. I started to go out. I danced to ABBA. And eventually, I came to the point where I really felt pretty good about myself. And then the AIDS crisis hit. And this mysterious disease moved in that community in such a horrible way. And my friends were sick. And my friends were dying. My grad school roommate, Ned Austin, died. My boyfriend, Hank Gossam, died. That is Hank's patch in the quilt. He was born in Rising Sun, Indiana. I went to so many funerals, I was numb. But I found the fact that because I had to go from funeral to funeral, it forced me to put one foot in front of the other. And when the funerals were over, I just kept taking steps. And now at this point, I look back and I realize I'm a survivor. I survived a global health crisis. And I lived to see the day that I got married. So the 80s went on, and I finished back-to-back degrees at Northwestern. I earned a conducting degree, and I couldn't find a job. Because no one wanted to hire me with a master's degree and no experience. So I got a job as a waiter. I worked at the pump room in Chicago. It was a great place to work. And I kept taking interviews, and I kept working, kept taking interviews. And a year went by, and still nothing. I became the maitre d' at the pump room. I was doing very well. I was on salary. Still no job. I was at the point where I was about to change my career path to restaurant management. And then someone took a chance on me. Dean Simpson at Northern Valley Regional High School in Old Tappan hired me. And it was a damn good job. And I stayed there for 31 years. And then when I retired in 2013, a former student became the chair of music at this school, the Master's School in Dobbs Ferry, New York. And she scooped me right up out of retirement. And so now, 36 years later, and 2 magnificent jobs later, I can barely remember the struggles and the pain and the failure that I felt waiting tables at the pump room. So those are my stories. I've asked you to think of one of yours. All of these situations create stress and anxiety for us. So what are we supposed to do with that anxiety when we reach a breaking point? What are we supposed to do when we reach this tipping point? There is a relatively new branch of psychology called positive psychology. It was championed by Dr. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. Positive psychology is the scientific study of human flourishing as an applied approach to optimal functioning. And one of its key elements is the idea that we can shift our perspective. When you look at something with new eyes, you ask new questions and you can get new answers. So what can you do? Well, you can change your words and you can change your mindset. Instead of saying, I don't understand this, say, what am I missing? Instead of, I've made a mistake. Think instead, what can I learn from this? Instead of, I'm never going to be good at this, think, maybe I'm on the right track. Among the core values in positive psychology are the ideas of the importance of relationships, acts of kindness, and physical well-being. Working from a positive mindset, it empowers the ideas of optimism, mindfulness, and gratitude. In many ways, positive psychology is like looking at the glass half full. So let's look at failure through this lens of positive psychology. And to do that, I want to flip it over and really define success. What is the common definition of success? Well, most of the time, when we accomplish something, we think, wow, I did a great job at that, except this one part that didn't go so well. So a lot of times, our success ends up being what is left from our expectations after we factor in our failures. So I set out to write a new formula. I thought about this, and I realized that it's important that we recognize the experience that we get from our failures and the wisdom that we gain from those experiences. So, experience magnified by wisdom. To go further, I think it's really important to include perspective. Maintaining perspective means that we keep goals within proportion to the potential. You would not ask your 6-year-old daughter to run a mile, but you could ask her to do that at age 16. Positive psychology teaches us that perspective is malleable. We can adjust our perspective. Our perspective can be a positive attitude. Experience amplified by wisdom in the context of a positive attitude can yield success. I like this formula so much better. I think we are in so much better control of all of these things. We can leverage the experience that we gain from our failures. We can culture our wisdom. And although it's difficult at times, we can control our attitude. So this is a symbolic equation. This would not stand up to my math friends at Masters. But I think it is important that we recognize its value in our own lives. So here's my challenge to you today. When you leave, I want you to think about that epic fail that you're holding. I want you to process it through this equation and see what you come up with and what changes you can make in your life. I want to close with one last story. When I got that job, I played in a concert band in northern New Jersey, the Ridgewood Concert Band. And I sat here on the end of the second row, right next to the edge of the stage. I play clarinet. So I'm playing, and it's very, very wonderful. We're playing Der Rosenkavalier Waltzes by Strauss. We're playing, and suddenly I realize my toe is caught in the seam of the riser under my feet, and my body's center of gravity is lunging forward, because I'm being very expressive, of course. In slow motion, I can feel my body lunging at the player in front of me, and I knew I was going to wipe her out. In that moment, I knew the only thing I could do was to use that foot to push myself in a different direction, sideways, and off the stage. And so in the middle of that concert, I fell off the stage and crashed onto the floor. It was spectacular. And when we finished that number, the conductor acknowledged me and said, and the clarinetist who fell off the stage was Curt Ebersole. So as you can imagine, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of this story. I try to tell this story before a concert with any ensemble when I feel they're a little jittery. Because I know if I tell that story and they recognize this, that no matter what happens in that concert, it'll never be as bad as when I fell off the stage. So I want you to reframe your failures. Take baby steps. Think about small changes in quantity that can be amplified for change. Think about that new formula for success. The only thing you have to lose is your fear of failure. Thank you.